Whenever someone felt nervous or upset, he was always the kind of person you wanted by your side. On screen, they smiled together, fixed broken heirlooms, and moved families to tears with every restoration. But behind the familiar warmth of the repair shop, Suzie and Steve Fletcher carried a secret that stretched back decades. While viewers admired their skill and kindness, very few imagined the silent battles they were fighting when the cameras stopped rolling. Now, for the first time, Suzie and Steve Fletcher are opening up about their untold story, and fans are stunned. What seemed like a calm, steady life of tradition and craft actually carried the weight of hidden pain, childhood struggles, and years of silence. Finally, they decided to share the truth that had been locked away for so long. For more than a decade, millions of people found comfort in the repair shop's gentle rhythm. The sound of sandpaper smoothing old wood, the steady ticking of a clock brought back to life, and the tears of joy from families reunited with treasured heirlooms created a place of peace and nostalgia. At the center of it all were Suzie and Steve Fletcher, the siblings whose presence seemed almost magical. Suzie, with her soft voice and delicate touch, showed patience and care in everything she did. Steve, calm and methodical, balanced her perfectly, creating a harmony that viewers instantly connected with. Together, they weren't just craftspeople. They were symbols of loyalty, family, and resilience. Their laughter, the way they shared unspoken glances, and the quiet support they gave one another made audiences feel they were watching something truly special. But behind those warm smiles and steady hands was a story they had kept hidden from the world. There were moments when viewers sensed something more, like a flicker of sadness in Suzie's eyes when a certain object reminded her of lost times, or the brief pause in Steve's movements when conversations drifted too close to personal memories. These small moments hinted at a deeper story, but no one could have guessed the depth of what they carried. Suzie Fletcher's life, in particular, held layers far beyond what viewers saw on screen. She grew up in the rugged beauty of Colorado's wide ranchlands, where she learned the value of hard work, responsibility, and resilience. The land was vast and breathtaking, but it was also tough and demanding, lessons that would shape her strength in years to come. Her marriage began with hope and the promise of love, but over time it turned into one of the hardest chapters of her life. The man she once trusted became a source of deep pain, though she rarely spoke of it, even to those closest to her. What should have been a bond of care and respect became one of control and fear. Bruises were hidden beneath clothes, emotions were locked away, and love was replaced by silence and endurance. Even though Suzie carried heavy pain inside her, she never let it break her spirit. Instead, she turned her struggles into strength, pouring that energy into every piece she restored and every story she helped preserve. Her work became a quiet way of healing, but deep down, the scars never truly faded. They were invisible to the audience, but she knew them well. Her brother, Steve Fletcher, who shared the workshop with her, carried his own weight too. He had always been the quiet protector of their shared history. To the world, he was the master of antique watches and clocks, a man who seemed at peace with the steady ticking of gears and springs. But behind that calm was someone trying to manage far more than just timepieces. He carried the responsibility of protecting his sister, of keeping family tensions at bay, and of making sure the workshop felt like a safe place for both of them. His steady hands didn't just repair broken objects, they quietly helped mend hearts, including his own. Together, Suzie and Steve presented a strong and united front to the world. Their playful moments, their shared smiles, and their quiet exchanges gave fans the sense that they were seeing the whole story. But in truth, what the audience saw was only the surface. Beneath it lay a history shaped by hardship and survival, a story that would one day come to light and reveal the true depth of their strength. Their childhood home in Oxfordshire looked, at first glance, like a place full of warmth and charm. It was an old house with creaky wooden floors and wallpaper that had faded with time. The rooms were alive with the laughter and chaos of four siblings chasing each other through narrow halls, making things, breaking things, and fixing them again. It was the kind of house that smelled of freshly brewed tea, where birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes, and where family meals brought everyone together. To outsiders, it seemed like the picture of a happy, close-knit family. But hidden beneath that lively atmosphere was another reality. Their mother struggled deeply with postnatal depression, a a condition that was barely understood at the time. It was often dismissed, ignored, or hidden away behind closed doors. The result was a household where laughter and playfulness were sometimes just a mask over something darker. Their mother's energy would often vanish without warning, leaving her isolated and sad. Their father tried to hold the family together, but the pressure became too much. Behind his attempts at being strong, he was quietly breaking down. Eventually, the strain led to his own nervous breakdown, a collapse that shook the whole family. There were times when the children were quietly sent to stay with relatives, where they could be shielded, even briefly, from the storm at home. For the siblings, warmth sometimes felt like a fragile mask, a thin layer covering the cracks beneath. Years later, Steve spoke about those times with honesty and compassion. "Our mom suffered dreadfully from postnatal depression," he said. "It wasn't just sadness, it was complete isolation. It pushed Dad over the edge, and he couldn't cope. It was a very dark time for us." Suzie, too, reflected on those years with empathy. "Looking back, I just feel so sorry for Mom," she explained. "Nobody really understood how devastating it was. The treatments they offered then were crude, even barbaric compared to what we know now. She was trapped in a system that couldn't help her." Despite those hardships, their memories of their parents were not only defined by pain. They remembered love too, moments of comfort and care mixed in with the struggles. Steve said quietly, "We had our problems like most families, but we also had each other. We somehow got through it, and it didn't hold us back the way people might expect." That resilience was not born out of luck. It was the strength of a family determined to keep moving forward, no matter how imperfectly. When Suzie reached her 30s, she made a choice that would change her life. She left Oxfordshire behind and moved across the ocean to Colorado in the United States. To many, it looked like an exciting adventure, a fresh start in a new country where she could carve out her own path. But beneath the surface, it was also a kind of escape. The move wasn't just about opportunity. It was about leaving behind the shadows of her past and finding space to breathe again. Colorado's wide landscapes and endless skies gave Suzie the space she had long needed. It was a place far from the struggles of her childhood, a place where she could finally breathe. In America, she believed she had found love. She married Rob, a man who would become part of her story, though never seen by the public. To fans of the repair shop, his absence was obvious. He never appeared on screen, and that silence spoke louder than any words. The marriage was rarely talked about, but what happened behind closed doors was far from the fairy tale people might have imagined. It was a painful chapter in her life, one filled with endurance and quiet battles. What she endured in that relationship was deeply traumatic, yet it shaped her into the strong and compassionate woman audiences would later admire. She carried the scars, but she refused to let them define her. Instead, she turned her pain into empathy, using it to connect with people and to heal through her craft. Those hidden years in Colorado became the foundation of the resilience that carried her forward. They were years that left shadows, but they also planted the seeds of transformation. Her journey from private suffering to public fulfillment proved that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive. Meanwhile, back in the UK, Steve Fletcher's life unfolded quietly within Oxfordshire. To viewers, he was the cheerful horologist, always calm as he worked with delicate clocks and watches. But the reality was more complicated. Behind that calm exterior was a man who lived carefully, setting clear boundaries around his private world. He raised 5 children in a close-knit family, and he built a reputation as a master craftsman whose hands could bring broken heirlooms back to life. Yet beneath that success was a silence that bound the Fletcher family together. It was not accidental, it was survival. Steve and Suzie both understood the cost of exposure, of sharing too much. In a rare interview, Suzie admitted, "We were forced to hide this, because families didn't share. Not back then. It wasn't safe to talk about these things." Their silence wasn't weakness, it was protection. Growing up in a time when mental health was taboo, they learned to build walls around their pain. It was the only way to protect themselves and each other. For Steve, staying in Oxfordshire and never escaping into a new life like Suzie did was also an act of endurance. He didn't run from the past, he carried it with him, steady and unbroken. His steadfastness became its own quiet form of resilience. But the cameras could never capture the private weight he bore. They didn't show the moments when his hands, so steady while repairing timepieces, would tremble with memories of things best left unspoken. They didn't reveal the nights spent wrestling with sorrow or the pressure of preserving a family legacy marked by both love and loss. Between them, Steve and Suzie shared a silence that spoke volumes. It was a language without words, made of glances, gestures, and a deep understanding only siblings could share. It was forged in pain but held together by fierce love. But time always reveals cracks, even in the strongest facade. For the Fletchers, the careful veneer of composure they presented began to show subtle signs of strain. Viewers noticed when Suzie was absent from several episodes of the repair shop. Her once bright presence seemed dimmed, as though old shadows were beginning to resurface. Fans whispered concerns, unsure of what lay behind her silence. Steve, too, seemed changed. His interviews grew more reflective, his words carrying a weight that hinted at untold stories. On podcasts and behind-the-scenes moments, fragments of memory slipped through, carefully chosen words that revealed pain without ever fully explaining it. The audience, who loved them for their authenticity and warmth, began to sense that what they were seeing on screen was only a fraction of the truth. Their silence no longer felt like a simple boundary. It felt like a plea, for understanding, for patience, for respect for battles fought in private. What had they endured to become so close? What hardships had forged such an unbreakable bond? What truths still lay hidden behind their resilience? Those cracks in their public image did not weaken them in the eyes of their fans. Instead, they invited empathy, reminding everyone that behind even the brightest smiles often lies a story of survival. The Fletcher family's story was no longer just about repairing antiques. It became something much deeper, a human story of survival, endurance, and the quiet bravery of protecting each other through their darkest moments. As public curiosity grew, so did anticipation. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't just about what had been hidden. It was about the strength that comes from being vulnerable and the courage it takes to speak aloud what once could only be whispered. The choice to open up didn't happen overnight. It was the result of years of internal battles, of carrying silence like a heavy burden, until one day it became too much. For decades, Steve and Suzie lived with dignity, showing the world only their passion for restoration and their warm smiles on the repair shop. Yet, behind the cameras, their silence wasn't about shame. It was about survival. Pain doesn't always show itself clearly. Sometimes it hides behind calm eyes and soft voices. The turning point came quietly. Not through a dramatic headline, but through a podcast interview. In that intimate setting, their guard finally began to lower. At first, the words came hesitantly, as though testing the air. But once spoken, there was no turning back. Steve was the first to reveal the weight he had carried. When you grow up with that kind of background, you just carry it quietly, he admitted. But eventually, you have to let some of it go. You can't keep everything locked inside, it eats away at you. His words weren't about seeking sympathy, they were about release. In that moment, the siblings chose honesty over silence. Vulnerability became their strength. Even then, what they shared was only a glimpse of the full story. Beneath the surface lay chapters far darker. In a rare interview, they peeled back more layers. Suzie revealed painful truths about her marriage, a part of her life the public had only guessed at. Her husband, Rob, had fought pancreatic cancer with incredible strength. But as his illness grew worse, so did his behavior. Subtle changes in his character turned into something terrifying. The man she once trusted became controlling and violent. The most painful memory she shared was one that haunted her deeply. In a voice barely above a whisper, she recalled being lifted off the ground by her throat, gasping for air as she truly believed she was about to die. He was squeezing so hard I thought my airway would close completely. I don't know what made him let go, but when he did, I was left shaken, terrified. For Suzie, admitting this out loud was shocking even to herself. I always thought it could never happen to me, she confessed. I told myself he would never hurt me. But then I felt his hands around my throat, and everything I believed shattered. The transformation of Rob from loving partner to someone unpredictable and dangerous left Suzie scarred. But in telling her story, she found strength. Speaking became her freedom. Breaking the silence was no longer just about her. It was about reclaiming her life. For years, millions of viewers watched Suzie and Steve restore family heirlooms with skill and patience. But what audiences didn't see was the resilience behind their work. The real story wasn't just in the objects they repaired. It was in the people themselves. Behind the polished leather and carefully mended clocks were invisible scars from childhood struggles, unspoken pain, and personal battles. Each item they restored mirrored their own lives, damaged but not beyond repair. Steve once admitted in a quiet moment, "We didn't just fix things for others. It became part of our own healing." Bit by bit, as we restored these treasures, we found pieces of ourselves. Suzie agreed, saying, "Every stitch I made wasn't just about the leather. It was about putting myself back together, even when I wasn't ready to say it out loud." The world had seen them as expert restorers, but they were also survivors. They had learned to smile and carry on even while fighting heavy battles inside. What held them together was their bond, an unshakable connection built on shared pain and unwavering love. When the siblings finally opened the door to their private struggles, the impact was powerful. Viewers saw not just artisans at work, but human beings who had endured abuse, childhood trauma, and mental health struggles in silence. They revealed the weight of generational pain, burdens passed down like shadows, threatening to repeat themselves. Yet, instead of letting it break them, they chose kindness. They chose to keep creating, to keep restoring, not just objects but hope. Suzie's revelations became the heart of their story. For decades, she had carried her truth in silence. Now, she spoke with honesty and courage. Her story wasn't just about survival. It was about inspiring others to break their own silence, to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength. This was no longer just another chapter in the repair shop. It was a reckoning. The polished image of restoration gave way to something raw and real, fragile, beautiful, and deeply human. For the first time, Steve and Suzie weren't just preserving history for others. They were reclaiming their own. Piece by piece, stitch by stitch, they rebuilt not only antiques but also their identities. And in doing so, they left their audience with an unforgettable lesson. Healing is an act of creation, and sometimes the greatest restoration is the one we do for ourselves. What about you? Is there a truth you've kept hidden for too long? What would it take for you to finally let it out? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for being part of this journey with us.